Hello, everyone. Again, hello. My name is Stephen Erlanger. I'm the Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. And we have 35 minutes for, I think, what could be a wonderfully interesting panel. I'm very honored to moderate two people on the question of democratization, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. So I have the pleasure to have Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who is the de facto leader of the Belarusian dissidents. Her husband was jailed by the Lukashenko regime, and she ran in a presidential election in his place, and charges of fraud have been rampant. And there have been many sanctions against the Lukashenko regime from the EU, but the repression is continuing. And I also have the great pleasure to have Péter Szijjártó, who has been foreign minister of Hungary for the last 7 years, to help discuss this issue. So the first question, there's been a lot of talk about what it means to have an illiberal state, this famous phrase of Viktor Orban. But first, I want to ask Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, do you regard Hungary as a democracy that follows the rule of law?
Would start.
I think that all the countries that are in the European Union are democratic. I think it's a privilege. And I think that, yes, they are democratic, no doubt. They wouldn't join all the decisions of European Union about sanction regime in Belarus without democratic values.
Mm-hmm. Good. Foreign Minister, your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, visited Lukashenko in Belarus in June of 2020, which is several weeks after your husband was arrested, by the way. And he said then that the two countries are much closer to one another than we tend to believe. He also said that Hungary believes sanctions against Belarus ought to be lifted. Is that still your government's position?
Look, first of all, we definitely used to have a pragmatic and practical cooperation between Belarus and Hungary because we base our foreign policy on following the national interest. And as many other EU member states, we had a pretty active economic partnership, trade partnership, investments, obviously. Since the last presidential election, obviously, because of many reasons, the intensity of the relationship has been decreased. Although last week in New York, I have met the foreign minister, Vladimir Makej, to go through issues regarding the relationship between EU and Belarus. But as Mr. Tsikhanouskaya just said, we joined all the common European decisions. Mm-hmm. We joined all the decisions regarding sanctions. I think it would deserve not only a 35, but an hour and 35-minute discussion whether the decisions of the European Union, generally speaking, not specifically on Belarus, on sanctions, were successful or not. Yes. Because if we look back on the sanctions against Russia, now the question is whether they were successful or not.
I mean, this is a very good point, yeah. And it's a big debate generally, which is the use. Are sanctions just a way of feeling good about something, and do they actually accomplish the end? Usually, it's the threat of sanctions that produces action, and not the sanctions themselves.
Yeah, right? But I agree with you. But in case the sanction decisions of the European Union tend to be unsuccessful, then after a while, threatening with sanctions will be without any kind of impact as well. That's why I always urge or ask my colleagues in the European Union to think strategically. And if we have a challenge ahead, do not only think about sanctions, because after a while it's not going to be credible.
Sure, sure. But I mean, the EU is planning a 5th round of sanctions against Belarus. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, do you favor more sanctions? Do you think they're having an impact on the regime, or would you like different kinds of sanctions, perhaps sanctions that are more aimed at individuals?
You know, people who are very cautious about sanctions should propose what other leverages European Union and other democratic countries have.
Ask him.
You know, to influence the situation in Belarus. Since the beginning, since the fraudulent elections, we tried to appeal Belarusian regime diplomatically. We tried to organize events and meetings for negotiations with the regime. No response. International organizations are not working, it's a pity, with dictatorships. So we see the sanctions is the only leverage European Union has to put pressure on the regime, to make them understand that we will not, we don't accept your policy, we don't accept your attitude to your people. You humiliate people's rights in your country. Thousands are suffering in jail, thousands are being tortured. So what else can be done except sanctions?
Let's ask for Mr. Szijjártó. She's presented a very good question. If you don't think sanctions are working, what do you think would work, and what would you like to do instead?
Look, we are now digging deeper and deeper, which is good in this regard, because we start to raise the question whether the European Union has any kind of toolbox when it comes to foreign policy or foreign politics, and whether there's strategic thinking regarding foreign policy. Look our relationship with Russia, look at our relationship with China. Unfortunately, they are mostly characterized by sanctions. And the question is whether it makes sense or not. And the other question is whether it's hypocritical or not. Because, for example, last time, you know, we imposed sanctions against some individuals in China. Mostly the communication on behalf of European Union is hostile towards China. And if you look at the figures, you see that last year was the first year ever that the European Union has traded more with the Chinese than with the United States. On the other hand,
Partly
United States traded...
COVID.
Sorry?
Partly because of COVID,
well,
by the way.
Yeah, but I mean, 2020 was definitely the first year for that, and the US traded more with China than with the European Union as well. And you know, figures matter, because communication is one thing, and the real issues are another thing. And my general remark is that you know, many times what I feel is that the big member states of the European Union, who are most critical to external partners, they make the biggest businesses under the surface. So that's why I'm afraid I'm not quite able to answer your question whether European Union has any kind of leverage on the issues of Belarus, issues of Russia, whatever, because last years have proved that our impact is rather limited on these issues.
Well, obviously you raise an extremely good point, which is first about hypocrisy, and second about the power of trade over principles or over foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And this has been, you know, it's one of the American complaints sometimes about Europe, but we have the same issue too. I mean, to some degree, foreign policy is another instrument of trade and vice versa. But I'm very intrigued since, do you have lessons as a government that emerged from the Soviet bloc? I mean, I remember Kadar, right? He who is not against us is with us, right? That Hungary had a very liberal communism. It had, well, I mean, it had a, well...
It might seem like that from the outside, okay?
No, well, I was inside, by the way. I spent quite a lot of time in communist Hungary when you were a boy. And I know your party believes very strongly that you were the real anti-communists because you were on the outside. You weren't part of the urban communist elite. I've heard this from Mr. Orban. But the question is, does the Hungarian experience provide any lessons for the Belarusian dissidents? I mean, how do you dislodge a Lukashenko who has the help of Russia, which has infiltrated workers and and policemen and all kinds of people, and is engaged in a very tough repression? Are there any lessons that you can provide?
You know, it's extremely complicated because all countries are different. So I think that this kind of universalization or generalization does not work at all. We have been under communist regime for 40 years, but we were not part of the Soviet Union. We have suffered a lot. From the outside, it might have seemed that it's a liberal communism, but it was really terrible. I mean, you will find almost all families in Hungary which have memories about suffering like mine. A lot of suffering in my family, also because of being anti-communist. And then in the mid-80s and 80s, our party, Fidesz, was really the anti-communist party. Our current Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, was the first politician in Hungary to be brave enough to urge the Soviet troops to leave Hungary. Then in 1990, we had the system change. Since 1990, we have never had early elections. All parliaments served their terms. In other countries, it was different. So even if you look at those countries which were not part of the Soviet Union, but were part of the Comecon, all stories of system change are different because simply we are different people, you know?
No. I mean, one of the things I was struck by, I saw on Mr. Orbán's website, he said, quote, Westerners often look upon themselves as people who stand for ideals that are superior to ours. And I'm very struck by that. Does he not regard himself as a Westerner?
Look, geographically speaking, we are in the central part of the European continent, let's put it this way.
What does he mean by this?
Okay, what do we mean? Look, we had to fight for our freedom for 4 decades, and we have not been located in the lucky part of the continent where the peace and prosperity and sovereignty and independence were kind of presents, gifts of history, right? So we had to fight for it. And now, on many occasions, which has been reflected in your question, by the way, we are, your first question to Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, we are always lectured, judged by the western part of the continent, how we should live our lives, how our political system should work. We are accused of not being democracy, just because we are not liberals in the government. We have a...
Well, not just because you're not liberals in the government.
No.
There are issues of corruption and rule of law and justice.
But you know,
so
these are perceptions.
I mean, we don't have to get into that.
Yeah, but these are perceptions. These are all
they're not
perceptions.
just perceptions.
And I'm happy to I'm happy to speak about facts. I'm happy to speak about concrete issues. But perceptions, putting forward perceptions, simply doesn't make sense. We are definitely a government which is conservative, patriotic, Christian democratic, and we do believe that democracy does not need any kind of qualifier. Democracy is a democracy, and liberal democracy is just a type of democracies, but liberal democracy is not the democracy itself. And monopolizing democracy is very anti-democratic, basically. So this is what we mean, that when Prime Minister said illiberal democracy, the question you raised at the beginning, what he said was that since in our political system it is not the liberals who won in a democracy, that's why it can be considered as an illiberal democracy, because it's not liberals to govern. Sure. It's Christian Democrats and it's a democracy.
And it is very important to say you were elected.
Absolutely.
And in 2010 elected in a big way.
And then 14 and 18.
After the failure of the previous social democratic government and lots of problems with corruption and so on. I mean, no one challenges that you're a democracy.
Well, you don't challenge, many others do, but thank you very much for not challenging.
No, but Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, Lukashenko calls Orbán his friend. He has said so. Do you regard it that way? Do you think of Orbán as his friend? Does Orbán support him in some way that bothers you or not?
I don't really know anything about the private relationship. They could be different, you know, but I think as the rule of the country, or democratic country, at this difficult moment in Belarus, where people are tortured, where absolute absence of law in our country, you can't vocally declare that you support dictator, that you are supporting terrorist who is terrorizing the whole country. So, you know, it's up to any leader to be friend or not to be friend, like you know, on private position. But you are presenting the whole nation, the whole country, and you are speaking on behalf of all people. So in case you are showing these signs of friendship with dictator, means that you are supporting violence, you are supporting tortures. And, you know, I think it's responsibility, first of all, for the decisions.
I mean, you have traveled many places trying to build up support for your cause, for a new election, for fairness, to get people out. Have you been to Hungary? No.
No.
If you were to go to Hungary, perhaps you'd be invited, I don't know, and you were to meet Mr. Orbán, what would you ask of him?
First of all, I would tell the real situation. Maybe sometimes during my visit I see that leaders don't understand what's going on in reality, because for many, many years, you know, Belarus was taken as a part of Russia, as appendix of Russia. You know, nobody had, you know, real political communication with Belarus, and sometimes leaders don't understand the peculiarities of processes that are going on in Belarus. And after this, maybe I would ask for his attitude to this situation, not to Lukashenko himself, but to the situation. Is it possible to accept this lawlessness in the country? So I think we could have fruitful conversation, just changing opinions, and maybe you would come to the conclusions.
Yeah, we have already met once in Brussels, as Ms. Sviatlana was invited to take part in a meeting prior to the Foreign Affairs Council, and there I have listened to the explanation of the situation in Belarus, and obviously, if you honor us with your visit, you are always welcome. That's not a question, absolutely. But if I didn't want to be impolite by interfering, but you know, portraying our Prime Minister as if he was supportive to any kind of oppression or torture or any kind of regimes or any kind of dictatorship is a little bit too much. So I think we shouldn't do that here. We shouldn't do that here. My Prime Minister, I think, is the most democratic leader in Europe, because imagine, we had 8 elections in Hungary since transition. He participated on all 8 elections. He won 4 times, he lost 4 times, he never challenged the outcome. He always stayed in politics, he was always accountable, and he always led our political family on elections. He is a true Democrat, a true anti-communist leader. So portraying him as a friend to dictators, I think it's a little bit too much. You know, in our foreign policy, it's true that we try to interfere, try not to interfere into domestic issues of other countries. So maybe that's why you don't hear us to be very vocal on issues of other countries. There are some other friends in the European Union who love to do so. So, you know, I just don't want to be too pushy. Some others are speaking on behalf of the European Union in this regard. But considering us, and especially the Prime Minister, as not you know, subscribing to the common decisions of the European Union in this regard is not true. I mean, we were part of all the common decisions of the European Union.
And also, it must be said, whenever the European Court of Justice has done a final ruling, you've always obeyed it.
Yeah, of course.
No, it's true. The question sometimes arises, is Hungary a different kind of model for Central Europe? Do you think it's a model? You know, some people think the peace, law and justice is somehow following the Hungarian model. Do you think that's true? And do you think Hungary represents a different kind of Christian conservative model for Central Europe?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. You know, you have mentioned here that we won in 2010 the elections, but we won 2014 and 18 as well.
But you won so big in 2010.
Yeah, all cases in a two-thirds majority.
Right.
And I think that political stability matters, because if you have a non-coalition, one-party government with a significant public support and a stable political background, then you have the freedom to act. And then you are not influenced by others, then no foreign interference can be successful, and you can really put the national interest on your flag. So as I would characterize ourselves is a government which has the room to make and opportunity to make the decisions by putting into consideration the national interest as the #1 issue. So I think our example has shown that political stability can or enables a country to make a great achievement. Look back in 2010, we were lagging behind when it comes to the European Union. We were under IMF program even prior to Greece at that time. And our economic figures were dramatic.
Yeah.
And now we are performing the highest growth rates, one of the best employment rates in the European Union. So it's a successful country. This means
I mean,
that
no one is challenging that
but
it's a successful economic country.
absolutely.
The question is challenging or is questioning the model of democracy that you are representing and whether it is a model for other countries. That's the question.
Look, I mean, you have to ask other countries how they look at us, if it matters at all. In our case, what I can tell you is that we do believe in democracy, but we do believe that democracy does not need any kind of qualifier. Right. And we don't like the monopolization of democracy by the liberals.
That's fine. No, I mean, and obviously you have elections coming, and the opposition is
next April.
And the opposition is trying to get itself together, but it's a very wide, from Jobbik to the others. We'll see what happens. I mean, may I go to Ms. Tsikhanouskaya? One of the challenges, obviously, is the terror Vladimir Vladimirovich has of orange revolutions, right? I mean, Putin has nightmares that begin in Ukraine that started a bit in Moscow of popular revolt. And so do you think this is a big issue for him in Belarus? Can he allow Lukashenko to go in the face of popular resistance?
First of all, it's not up to any other country to decide the fate of Belarus. It's up to Belarusian people only. And we are always compared with the situation in Ukraine, but we have absolutely different context. We are not looking at European Union. It's a revolution against dictatorship. It's not against Russia or for Europe. We want to solve our fate by ourselves. And of course, Belarusians were extremely disappointed when Kremlin supported dictator. Means that he supported tortures and violence in Belarus. But we have to move forward. Okay, one country is backing dictator, but we have at least 27 countries in Europe, the USA, UK, who are supporting civil society in Belarus. So, okay, we are fighting in such circumstances, and we just see our goal, and we have to achieve this. Of course, we are trying to communicate with Kremlin because we understand that Russia will always be our neighbors, and we need this relationship, trade relationship. But we want this relationship in future in New Belarus to be more transparent, for Belarusian people understand what deals are happening between our countries. What is integration, roadmaps? People don't know anything about this. Government has to respect people, has to respect their opinion. Decisions about fate of countries shouldn't be taken by one person, especially by one dictator.
Do you fear pressure to have some kind of Russian-Belarusian state or stronger ties, stronger confederation? This is sometimes suggested. that this is the price Putin will ask for his support for Lukashenko. What do you think?
For many, many years, we have very extremely close relationship with Russia. And
Mali Brati.
we need each other. No, we don't like when we are called like this. We need each other, you know, but what's regime is doing now, they are manipulating with information. They say to the West, if you are not lift sanctions, we'll go closer to Russia. But we are already so closed that the next step is the loss of sovereignty of Belarus. And Belarusian people will never allow this. This is our main value for Belarusians. So, you know, but and on the other hand, any deals that are going between regime, illegitimate regime in Belarus and other countries that are they are not legal. They will not be accepted by Belarusian people. So it's like a political game, you know. And but I doubt that it will happen because ex-president of Belarus is so likes power so much, and he understands that in case of deeper integration of unity, you know, he will lose this power, and he doesn't want this.
Minister Szijjártó, do you think Europe is losing patience with the whole Belarus idea, and is there fatigue? As you say, the sanctions aren't working, the repression is quite severe. Brave people are either in jail or have been exiled or told to go or are waiting for better times. Is there a fatigue in the rest of Europe about this?
I would say that this issue in Belarus and the European reactions have shown very clearly where are the limits of our foreign policy impact.
Right.
So it has shown that we can't cause a change in another country, politically speaking, regardless of the sanctions, regardless of statements, regardless of resolutions. This is the maximum we can reach. We have to understand that. So it's not like fatigue, but it's like reality is being confronted with us.
And I just wanted to ask you both, we've just had this very moving session this morning with 2 Afghan women MPs who've had to flee Kabul because the democracy building project of 20 years, you know, which was a European and American project, has failed, has collapsed. Do you think this will have an impact on the way people look at what's going on in Belarus? Will people say, well, what can we do? Or do you think you can help them keep these ideas separate? In other words, I'm talking about the failure of democracy building. That's what I'm asking about.
You know, Belarusians are also tired. They are tired of cruelty. They're tired of fear. But we can't afford ourselves to say that we have done everything we could, because all the time you have to look for something else you can do in this situation. And I think that democratic countries, European countries, also at this moment can't afford themselves to say, okay, we can't pay any more attention to Belarus question, because this is not only about Belarus, this is about European dignity as well. Because you are talking so much about rule of law, about human rights, and now in the situation where this country is fighting for your values, for our common values, you are tired. You are too strong to say that you are tired. You are united. You have a lot of allies in the world. So be braver, be more principled, and don't let yourself solve this crisis without solving it. Because, for example, trading with political prisoners is not solving the crisis. Inviting representatives of the regime on different international events and organizations is not solving. It's like fake solving. So do everything possible. sanctions, political isolation, try to communicate to other leaders who can influence maybe personally to...
So, I mean, basically, Europe needs more self-confidence in its own values and in its ability to express them.
Absolutely.
But I think that was a perfect question, basically, which was a statement by Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya. That the question is whether Europe is able to do more, or whether Europe is able to achieve more, or that's the glass ceiling, or even more that it is the concrete ceiling what we have reached. Because if I look back to the last 7 years since I have a seat in the Foreign Affairs Council, I remember so many, let's say, encouragements, enthusiasm on behalf of the European Union to tell this country what to do, to tell that country what to do, to tell this country what to do.
It does like to lecture.
And then basically nothing happened. So actually, if you look back to the recent years and the European so-called common actions on foreign policy, well, the results are rather limited, unfortunately. And the case in Belarus, so far at least, shows the same.
Yes. We are running out of time, and I'd like to take some questions from the audience, if I may. I know there's a student who would like, there, please. So, I mean, can we bring the microphone to this lady, please? Thank you very much. And could you take your mask off and identify yourself so we can see you and hear you? Thank you.
I think it works. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Fatimata Tijarmen Jibrin Tayrou. I'm a student delegate with the Global Liberal Arts Alliance, and I'm from the American University of Paris. So the current definition of democracy is one that functions with the Western model. And this democracy is not universally applicable to all nations. And we have seen that democracy functions and is just as necessary to function with culture as it is with the systems in which they function in. So to what extent can you propose a certain solution to incorporate these non-Western democracies or these non-Western nations that do not fit within these constructs?
Would you like to?
Well, I think, you know, when it comes to the definition of democracy, then I think we always have to put into consideration national specificities, because we all come from a totally different background. We all have totally different heritage. We all have totally different culture. We might have different religion. And I think all these aspects must be put into consideration. I think it's one thing what matters, based on which we can decide whether a structure or a system is democratic or not. And this is whether the will of the people is being respected or not. Whether what happens is based on the will of the people or it's not. And as long as people do have the right to decide, as long as the political actions on behalf of the government are in line with the decisions and the will of the people, we can consider it as a democracy. And you know, what I think is, what is too much in international politics is judging, lecturing each other, and telling other countries and telling other nations how they should live their own lives. I'm pretty sure that as a Hungarian, I don't know better than the Slovaks how they should live. I don't know better than the Polish how they should live. But I do think that there's no one who would know better how we Hungarians should live. So as long as the will of the...
Not even the Romanians?
Come on, we are good friends with each other, but we don't interfere into issues of each other, obviously. So as long as the will of the people is being respected, as long as the people do have the right to decide, it should be considered as a democracy.
Yeah, for me, you know, democracy is responsibility, first of all. Responsibility of every person in the country for making your country better, for doing everything possible, you know, to make your country prosperous. And but this is the responsibility for taking care about the values that democracy is you know, promoting. So it's in Belarus we have never lived in democracy. Our people don't even know what democracy means, and it will be a tough period in Belarus when we will study to live in democracy. And when we'll study to understand that I'm personally responsible for the future. It's also very difficult education, but having paid too high price for these changes, I'm sure that we will become democratic nation very soon.
Is there, yes, I see one more hand, please. Thank you.
Snezhka Kvadik-Mihailovic. I'm the Secretary General of Europa Nostra, the European Voice of Cultural Heritage, but I happen to be also born and raised in Belgrade. I've just heard something that from the Hungarian minister that I must say I felt a little bit disturbed. You said that people are having different cultures. As somebody who works for the European Cultural Heritage Organization, of course, the diversities in cultural heritage, in culture, is extremely important. Nobody is doubting about that. But saying that when you are a member of a European Union family, a European family, that you are also a country that has signed the European Convention of Human Rights. This is not a question of a choice, of a culture. There are a number of human rights and freedoms, including the freedom of the media and of the oppression, that is not a question of a cultural heritage, of some sort of cultural identities. And so this is something that...
Can you frame it into a question?
The question is to you that you still consider that the model, the Hungarian model of democracy, is something which is compatible with fundamental European human rights and freedoms.
I can answer very quickly.
I think the question is she doesn't believe so.
Yeah.
So,
so the question is whether do I
Many
consider
other
it?
people don't believe so, not only me.
please, sir, I'm sorry.
My answer is yes. And I would like to ask you to ask your president what he thinks about that.
Voila. We have run out of time, but I am so grateful to both of you for this interesting experiment, for being open and honest, and I, for one, am very grateful to each of you, so let me start what I hope will be a wide round of applause.